Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm your host, Dr. Haider Shah. On behalf of Colwas, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we have another very interesting topic, and I'm really honored to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest speaker who is going to talk about making online learning meaningful through the science of learning. Due to pandemic, education has changed dramatically with the distinctive rise of e-learning whereby teaching is undertaken remotely and on digital platforms. Research suggests that online learning has been shown to increase retention of information and take less time. So, how to make it more meaningful and what needs to be considered in online learning? For that matter, we have an expert with us in today's this session, so where he is going to tell us how you are going to manage the online learning activities. Indeed, a very interesting topic, and I'm sure you will learn a lot from this session. So stay tuned because in amazing stuff are coming ahead in this session. So before we start, I would like to thank Calvas for arranging such enlightenment sessions, for their support and providing us such a wonderful platform. The aim of Calvas is to give you the opportunity to connect and interact with world-renowned speakers, academic leaders, teachers, authors, researchers, experts, professionals, and businessmen to learn from their experiences, recommendations, and suggestions, which will create an impact and will enable you to learn and develop yourself in order to grow and transform individually, as well as to contribute to the world in a positive way. As our slogan is come, learn, and share knowledge. So today we have an amazing person as guest, a person having wonderful experience in industry and academia and internationally known. We always see him on different platforms while contributing to the field and world. He's a great human being and always ready to support and share his knowledge. So let me introduce him formally. He's a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Language and Communication, majoring in the educational technology, computational linguistics, learning sciences, and instructional design. He has won several awards at national and international levels for various innovation in teaching and learning as well as assistive technology. Moreover, he was also the recipient of Unanimous Academic Award for Teaching Award category in 2014, as well as the Best E-Learning Facilitator at International University E-Learning Carnival 2016. Previously, he served as the Deputy Director Teaching Excellence 2018 to 2020 and the E-Learning Coordinator 2016 to 2018 at the Center for Applied Learning and Multimedia. Last but not the least, he's a wonderful speaker, author, teacher, researcher, professional, and above everything, a great human being. So please help me in welcoming our guest, Dr. CHUAH Kiman. Welcome to the Canvas platform, and thank you very much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haider, for inviting me, and also to Kalwas for arranging this session. And I'm looking forward to be sharing with everyone
Yeah,
today.
it's really pleasure to you have Prof. It's wonderful, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. As a gentle reminder to the audience that Prof will be presenting, and he would leave the time for question answer session at the end of the presentation. You can ask question by writing in comment section, or you can email us on info@colwas.com. So let's get started. Over to you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haider, once again. Thank you so much for everyone who is joining this session. So, the topic given to me is making online learning meaningful through the science of learning. So, there are two parts of this. The first part is how to make it meaningful. The second one is through the science of learning. So, maybe to some of you, the science of learning is a bit new. So, I'll be doing some kind of like introduction to this science of learning, and let's see whether it's going to help you to create a more meaningful online learning experience. So the outline for today, I divided into two parts. The first part will be the essence of meaningful online learning. What actually makes online learning meaningful? And if you have any comments, you can always post it up, and then let's learn from each other. Because as we know, learning is very contextualized. What is meaningful to me may not be meaningful to you, or what is meaningful to you may not be meaningful to the rest of the world. Because you have different sets of learners, you have different sets of settings, you have different sets of environment to deal with. So in our case, we try our best to see what can be done to make sure that the online learning experience is meaningful to at least the majority of our learners. Key insights from the science of learning will be the larger portion of my sharing. I will be not many, because if you were to cover everything, that would be like not enough for this session. So I picked like five top, most commonly uh, used theories and most commonly discussed theories in science of learning, and then I relate it to the implication on online learning, and something for you to consider when you design your online learning activities, or when you decide what kind of strategies to use for your online learning or online teaching in your case, right? So the first part, so meaningful, like I told you, how meaningful is meaningful, right? To a lot of people, meaningful means you need to have your learners to be active, being very participative in everything that you are doing in your online setting. To some people means higher student engagement. Well, to some it's achievable learning outcome, meaning the student are able to achieve the learning outcomes or the objective that you have set for the session, or timely task completion, effective collaboration, purposeful assessment. When I talk to a lot of educators, they have different interpretation of meaningful. Some actually do not want students to be active. They just want them to complete the assignment or to complete the task. Some actually want them to talk more. But then it depends on how you perceive meaningful. But I think in general, as an educator or as a teacher or as a lecturer, as a professor, we want our learners to learn. I think that's the key word. But in order for us to know whether they are learning or not, that is the tricky part, because even in offline setting, in face-to-face or in-person setting in the classroom, it's very hard to know whether our learners are learning unless we have a very good brain scanner. We can scan everyone and then we know, okay, you learned this. It's very hard. But online learning somehow makes it even more challenging, because you are not in front of them. And if you're teaching online through medium like Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams and all that, it's even harder if they don't even turn on their camera, if they don't even talk. It's very hard to engage them. So there is a sense of lack of control in our from our side. Like when you're teaching, you don't know what's happening, you don't know whether they're listening to you, you don't know whether they're sleeping, and that kind of thing. So it makes it even more challenging when it comes to the online setting. So to say meaningful in an online learning context, the one of the best way to know is always the completion of the task, which is why I think a lot of educators will use that as a measurement, right? In a way, like how do they perform in the assessment. If they don't really do well, means they're not learning anything from your online learning or online teaching. Or when you look at the assignment, they did it terribly, or something like that. So, but we know that looking at the outcome alone may not be sufficient at times, right? Because the process is not really clear. They may learn something, but they may not complete the task due to other reasons. So there are many things that we have to consider when it comes to how meaningful is meaningful. So I'm gonna leave this open to all of you as educator. You kind of decide what do you want to get from this experience. But I believe all the key things have been listed here, especially the first two. If you talk to any educators or any teachers, they will tell you, I want my student to be active, I want to engage my students and all that. So if those are your goals, if the first two are your goals, then you probably need to think about other ways of looking at this rather than looking at just the completion of your task. Because they could be copying, they could be looking at other people's answer, but they may not be engaged. So it's quite tricky when it comes to using only one way of measuring your learning outcome. So later on in this session, I'll share a few tips on how to do that, and let's see whether it's going to help you. And let's dig deeper. So if you were to aim for a meaningful online learning, what are the skills that you need, right? What are the characteristics that an educator should have for the successful implementation of online learning? In a way, like, it's a bit unfair wanting something but then you're not putting any efforts to do it, right? It's like hoping your learners to be able to fly, but you are not even able to fly, in a way, right? Or it's like having a high expectation on your learners, but you are not reflecting on your role as an educator, whether or not you have the skills needed, whether or not you have the competency needed or characteristic needed to be a successful online educator. So it takes two to tango, as they say, right? You cannot depend on learners alone. As educator, we also have to reflect. If I want my learner to be active, for example, what are the things that I need to do? Should I learn about how to use certain tools? Should I learn about this more suitable platform? Should I actually learn from my colleagues? Talk to my friends or co-teacher and all that. What are the things that I need to do in order to make sure that I achieve the goal of creating that meaningful online learning experience? So I always observe this because when I do workshop to teachers, I've been doing quite a lot of workshop with teachers since the last 2 years in Malaysia, because teachers were struggling at first because they do not know how to go online, how to really teach online and all that. They always have this kind of, to me, unrealistic expectation of the learners. Like they want learners to be there, turning on their camera, stay focused on their on the screen for like 30 minutes to 1 hour. I think it's a bit hard because they are at home. There's so many distractions. There's so many other factors that they cannot control. For example, they want to focus on your lesson, but then the mother, or the father is calling them. Many things are disturbing them. So as an educator, what will you do about this, right? What are the things that you can do to overcome this kind of problem? And you need to set a more realistic kind of expectation. So you can't really expect your learners to be 24 hours with you when they are also doing other things because they are at home. Unlike in the classroom, because in the classroom you can lock them in the room, do whatever you want with them, and then after the school time they can just go back home. It's fine because you're in control. Right now in online learning setting, you lose that kind of control, and you need to give and take. What are the things that you can play with, or what are the things that you can make use of in order to increase a bit of control, but not too much, right? So I want you to reflect on these two things, so that as we progress to the later part of this session, you'll be able to see some of the consideration that you can take, right, in designing your online learning activities and all that, right? So I kind of divided into 4 critical areas whenever you teach, not just online learning, but then in this context, we're talking about online learning. You can also use this for offline teaching, or your normal face-to-face classroom. But in online setting, these are the 4 critical things. The first thing is always you need to define the clear learning goals. What do you want to achieve in every session that you have with your learners? It's a bit different from having it from the textbook type. Like you have that learning objective that you have in your textbook, or maybe your syllabus or your curriculum. This one is more like your own goal, actually. So you as a teacher, you need to decide in this session, looking at my learners, what do I want them to achieve from today's session? Let's say within 30 minutes, I want them to at least learn A, right? Even though the curriculum says you should be teaching ABC, but your learners, the level, the background knowledge and all that. I think my learners can only learn A today. So you set a very clear goal, a very clear and realistic kind of target. Okay, today, this session, I want to focus only on A, even though the curriculum says you should be doing A, B, C. So the B and C, you can deal it differently in a different session. Then you also have to understand online modalities. I think this is where, for the past 2 years, I think a lot of teachers, lecturers are struggling, because online modalities means you need to learn more tools, right? You have all this while, throughout your years of teaching, you have never used quizzes, you have never used Kahoot, you have never used like StreamYard, all these things. Suddenly, within this short period of time, you need to learn so many things because of this. You need to understand the different modalities that you can use in order to teach. So instead of using the normal whiteboard or blackboard in your classroom, now you have more, right? You have more tools to use. So you need to understand what are the modalities that you can capitalize. And I always tell teachers in Malaysia as well, choose the best one according to your own comfort level, right? Don't choose because everyone is using it, and then you just jump into that bandwagon, and then you realize it's too complicated to you. Because we have different competency or different preferences, like because of our exposure to different technology. Some people like tool A, some people like tool B. So you pick the one that you think you are more comfortable in. Because if you choose something that you don't like, you yourself don't like, it's going to affect the whole teaching and learning experience. Your student will struggle too because you yourself don't like it, right? Unless of course it's a top down kind of approach, top down approach as in you are ordered to use it. Even then you can still kind of make some decision on what kind of things that you can add on or maybe change a bit or edit a bit rather than just blindly follow, right? Like in the context of Malaysia, all teachers are required to use Google Classroom. It's a free tool. Google Classroom is one of the most widely used platform because of its simplicity. We could, if you go to Google Classroom, there's not many buttons to click on because it makes it clean and simple for teachers and learners to use. So a lot of teachers love that as compared to other platform where when they go in, they see too many buttons or too many links, they got overwhelmed and then they leave it. So you have to understand which one is more suitable to you and also your learners. And then the third part is understanding how learners learn. I think before the pandemic, we probably have been teaching for 10 or 20 years, or some of us may have taught for like 30 over years. We lose out on this because we have been doing this over and over again. We tend to forget that maybe it's high time to relook at how learners actually learn. What are the things that we can improve? Our generation of learners have changed, right? 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the kind of student that you're teaching maybe is different as compared to the one that you're teaching now. I personally feel it because, if I were to compare the student that I taught years ago and now, you will see a vast difference in terms of their behavior, in terms of the acceptance of technology, the way they view how you teach and all that is totally different. So by knowing this, that would help you a lot. And this is where learning sciences will come in. I mean, in this area of design and delivery. And last one would be selecting assessment strategy. So in any cases of learning, we cannot run away from assessment, because without assessment, then we will not know whether your teaching is, effective or achieving the intended goal. The thing about assessment is it's always confused with testing. People always assume assessment is synonymous with testing. A testing is a proper, like a examination kind of thing. Assessment may not be testing. I mean, testing is part of an assessment. Assessment can be progressive. It can be graded. It can be ungraded. What we value now in online learning setting is the ungraded one. The typical assessment that we know and we conduct just to test whether our learners are knowing. Like if I were to do an assessment now, after talking for a few minutes here, if I do a pop quiz, I can test whether my audience are understanding, are paying attention to what I've said and all that. So those kind of assessment, not to test them, to punish them, to give them grades, that kind of testing, so that learning will be more meaningful, right? So let's see whether that's going to be meaningful to you as well. Okay, this is what I meant by online modalities, because if you kind of spread it out like a spectrum like this. If you see here, you have instructor facilitated, and then you have resource facilitated, where on towards this side, resource facilitated means you're not there, you depend on the resources that you have. For example, videos. Like if you watch videos, if you created videos and they watch on their own, that would be asynchronous, meaning they do it on their own, self-paced. A lot of online learning courses are like that, right? With self-instructional materials. You are not there. I mean, you are there in a video format which have been pre-recorded, but you are not live with them, right? If you do online tutorial, live lecture, webinar like what we're doing now, that will be synchronous, that will be live, but then we are there, right? We are there, so it's still under instructor facilitated. If you have group discussion, like if you're using certain tools, you divide them into groups. During the live session, some people use breakout rooms in Microsoft Teams, or even in Zoom, or in some cases they use different tools. But you divide students into groups, they discuss, and then they come back to you in the main room. So that's kind of still instructor facilitated, but not so much, because they depend on peers, but still live, right? And then you have all this on demand or asynchronous one. Asynchronous means you're not there, they do it on their own. The famous one would be discussion board, forum, online, offline tasks. You ask them to write something and then upload. A project, you can ask them to complete certain project and then upload. You can see towards this end on the left, This project-based discussion, you still have a role to play, but not as much, because, like for example, forum, you can still go and join the forum and reply to them or give some feedback to them, but not as much as live, right? And also resource facilitated, you have all these self-paced games that you have. You can create some games, put it online, and then they can do it on their own, your videos, your materials. Intelligent tutoring system, not so much, I think, in most contexts, but in some cases, if you have a good system where it comes with this like a robot artificial teacher, being there teaching them, that will be counted as on demand as well, because you're not there, right? The thing. So these are like a simplified kind of key activities that you can do in terms of the different modalities. So you have to decide which one you want to use. You don't have to use everything. You just have to decide which one is the best for you. And I normally advise teachers to give a balance of both. Try not to go all synchronous. Okay, in universities, for example, a typical lecture would be 3 hours or 2 or 3 hours, right? For example, you can't do live for 2 3 hours. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, you can, but then it will not be that meaningful if it's purely live, right? If you mix with some discussion, group discussion, or if you mix with some case studies discussion, that would be more meaningful than just totally like 2 3 hours of live lecture. Or you can do 1 hour lecture and then 2 hours of asynchronous on-demand activity. So at least it's like a more balance. Because for live, my own experience, and even if you read up the review of all the uh, uh, emergency remote teaching during the last 2 years, you realize that the attention span is like very short. I think most learners, if it's live classes, they will pay attention. Maybe the most will be the first hour. That's the maximum I think you can go. After that, they will just doze off, or they will probably just put themselves online, but then do something else, and then they come back and then say bye bye, that kind of things, and then they will be rewatching your. If you share the recorded video, then they'll be rewatching the recorded video. Might as well, if you know that they are doing that, then might as well you prepare the video earlier. Then you can cut short the live session. So these are the things that you have to consider. Try not to mix not to say mix. Try not to assume that online learning is just a replica of the offline teaching that you normally do in the face-to-face setting. A lot of teachers think like that. They normally do that in a classroom. They want to transfer everything online and make it a replica or replication. So it's a bit hard to do that, because you're not in control of the students, because in a classroom they're all in front of you. You can do whatever you want basically. You can walk to them, you can engage with them, but in an online setting is a totally different thing, right? So based on all these things, modalities, and all these question about meaningfulness and all that, I would love to share a few insights from the science of learning, and not many, 5 of them, and see whether you can make use of all these insights or theories, or some practical suggestion in helping you to design more meaningful online learning experience. Oh yeah, this is just a quick one, just in case for those who are wondering what is the science of learning. It's not really a new field. It's been around for quite some time, but I think the group involved in learning sciences started to make it more niche. Like they create a research group that really focuses on the science of learning, in a way like they combine different fields, mostly from education, psychology, and even all this neuroscience and all that, in order to understand how learners learn and try their best to maximize the effectiveness of learning and teaching. So uh, I prefer science of learning, because when you say learning sciences, some people will think that you are learning, the sciences, the physics, the biology, and all. So it's a bit more confusing to use learning sciences, but it's widely used as well. But I prefer science of learning. Basically, you are learning about the science behind of the learning process and how learners learn and all that. Okay, so if you're interested, you can always search for this is a journal, and also the handbook, which is very famous, and also the famous book How People Learn is also part of learning sciences, right? Okay, so when it comes to the science of learning, these are the top 10 kind of I wouldn't say strategy, more like top 10 concepts that you will hear people kind of research or talk about over and over again, like prior knowledge, talking about memory, cognitive load, how do you build schema? Schema is related to prior knowledge. How do you build on that? Spacing and interleaving, desirable difficulty, and all this. So these are all some top concept. Of course, science of learning can go deeper, but normally it's within this realm where we just go deeper. For example, memory. If you compare about the research done on memory, like 2 decades ago as compared to now, then we realize that there's a change in the way how human react to certain stimulus. Last time, in 20, 30 years ago, we kind of think, oh, our short-term memory is stimulated by this and this, but now maybe because of technology, you will probably realize that the stimulant, it's even more now because of the early exposure. Like back in our days, we don't even have a smartphone when we were like a kid, right? Now I think a baby has a smartphone. The moment they open their eyes, they are looking at the smartphone. It's a totally different kind of exposure, and because of that, all this will be affected as well, right? So, but I'm not going to go into all this, but I'm picking the five. The first one, inside one, is what we call as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Now, Ebbinghaus is the person who kind of make this popular. He was the one who actually he studied himself. It's a very interesting character. So you can Google his name later. Psychologist and also scientist. He actually did his own. He used himself as a research at first, and then he replicated it. And then of course everyone else started to replicate this. So what happened was this forgetting curve tells us that I think we know in a simplistic manner is that we're going to lose the whatever we retained throughout the time, right? Whatever I'm telling you now today, tomorrow it'll be different, right? It's going to drop, and then another hour will be drop, and blah blah. If I ask you again after 1 month, I think you probably only remember maybe 20% or 10% or whatever have shared today. So imagine if you're teaching a lot of things within a short time. Let's say you're teaching like a whole textbook within 1 hour. It's going to be crazy because the student will not be able to retain everything anyway, right? So there's this technique created due to this forgetting curve. It's called spacing and interleaving, where there's this thing called block practice. You teach them more or less the same thing, but in block. I think this is very popular in schools, where you don't try to mix everything. You try to teach the same thing over and over again, but with different numbers, for example, or with different kind of example, but they're still talking about the same skill. In this case, they are still learning how to multiply fraction, for example, so you don't change. Another one is interleave. Once you have done the block practice for a while, like you can see the visual representation here. Each color represent one type of activity, right? So you can teach them in isolation first. Once you have done that, then you can do interleave. So there will be like a mix, like this, like this, like this. But you have to do the block practice first. The reason why you're doing this is to kind of do repetition or enhancement from time to time, so they don't lose out. Imagine if you only teach this once, right? And then you move on to this one. By the time you finish the green one, they will have forgotten the red one, right? If you were teaching in school or in class or in your teaching, that would be the same thing. If by the time you finish chapter 1, they have forgotten the earlier part of chapter 1, and when you go to chapter 2 or chapter 3, blah blah blah, will lose out everything. So this is why if you are designing any, in fact, not just online learning, in any kind of teaching, even in your classroom, it's always good to make sure that as you progress through the chapters, you are still recapping the previous one or make it more relevant to the next one. So there's a link between all this rather than in isolation. So whatever you're teaching, for example, if you're teaching research methods, today you're teaching qualitative, you have to, last month you taught them quantitative, right, for example. So when you're teaching qualitative, you try to relate it to quantitative again so that they refresh. Oh, okay. So when I'm doing qualitative, this is how I do my research. When the relationship with quantitative is in the difference and all that, they can see the differences so that they can keep on learning rather than quantitative done then dumb, right? And then qualitative dumb. So they can't relate. That's a problem with a lot of the way we structure our content, which is why students, what they normally do is they will revise 24 hours before exam. They will cram everything within a short time before the exam because they know that everything has been lost. So I think this is quite critical to know, so that when you do your structuring or even your lesson in an online setting, you try your best to make sure that it's taking into consideration this kind of forgetting curve. So students who know the pattern, like in my case, some students will realize you're doing this. They will know that you intentionally do this interleaving, for example. Like for my case, every chapter I progress, I will always have interleave practice for the previous chapters. So they will see, hey, this is in chapter 2, and then I try to relate it with chapter 3, for example. So they will kind of refresh their memory, in chapter what they have learned in chapter 2. So these are some strategies that you can use. So what is the implication now? Because of online learning, like what was mentioned by Dr. Haider earlier, this one, the first one, pre-recorded video, I find it very, very powerful. Last time, once you teach in a classroom or once you have taught in a classroom, that's it, gone, right? Because no recording done. Nobody is taking any recording of yourself. If you're teaching it multiple times, you yourself will forgot, whatever you have taught. That sometimes if you are teaching like 5 or 6 classes in 1 week, by the time you teach the last class, you might have forgotten whatever you told the first class, right? Because there's no recording done. So I find the pandemic taught us about this beauty of pre-recorded videos. So there's a lot of concept that you can pre-record, like whatever concept, whatever key concept or key topics that you want, you can do it pre-recorded. At any moment in time, the student want to revise, they can always go back to the video. So you don't have to repeat yourself many times. In fact, student will love it if you have if you're in a platform, if you're using certain platform like Google Classroom or even your own channel, you can create your YouTube channel. To me, if you want to save the hassle of not creating another platform, you can just make use of your YouTube channel. Just create your own channel, and then all your videos you arrange it nicely by topics. Then student will always come back to your channel, and then they'll be looking back at some of the things that you have told them in the class or in your live session. So you save a lot of time in repeating, and also you can make use your own video. So let's say I'm teaching it live now, I can point to my video. Okay, I have told you about this in this video, so I'm going to highlight some key things from this video, and later on you can watch this again if you need more explanation. So you can direct learners to all this access of different content, and they'll be, I'm sure they will be happy. Like my students love it when we have videos, because even if they lose out because of online setting, some student may have poor internet connection. So while you're explaining it, they got kicked out from the, like Microsoft Teams or whatever. They are not there. They lose out on that explanation, right? But if it's recorded, if it's, if you have pre-recorded video, they can always come back to the video, even if they are not there during that time, or they have some internet issue, or they were missing classes and all that. So I think this is quite powerful, and it allows space. And the thing is, because of the video, the learners can learn at their own pace. If they're fast, they can skip certain part. If they are slow, they can watch it over and over again, no matter how many times you want. Imagine if the slow learner keep asking you the same thing over and over again. I think you will be very frustrated. Luckily, with videos, you don't have to deal with them. The videos will be doing the job. It also affects the duration and design of synchronous teaching in relation to screen time, like I told you just now. Because of the forgetting curve, that they're going to lose out. They can't retain too much because of the memory capacity that they have. So you might want to reconsider the way you set the duration. So like I told my colleagues in universities, you don't teach for 3 hours online straight. You need to have break in between at least. If you really want to go for 3 hours, you really need to chunk it nicely, like 30 minutes break and then 30 minutes and all that. Or else the student are not going to get anything from the 3 hours that you spend. You are wasting your energy, and to be honest, because that they're not going to retain it, but you still go on and on, right? Content chunking, like is related to the first one as well. You have to chunk them, divide them into parts. Interleave online quizzes. This is what I like as well. So you don't wait the quizzes to be done like on a separate week or like a test. You do it in between your session. After you finish one topic, you can have one immediately, like maybe spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes just to do a quiz with them. And the quiz are not to punish. The quiz, you have to tell students that the quizzes are done to test, to monitor them, to see whether they have understood the concept that you have taught them. And it doesn't have to be graded, right? It can be, you can use these different tools that you have to do it. So it's related to regular self-paced formative assessment as well. Same concept. You can have reflection after class. You can have what else? Ask them to write something, right? Like a note after your session and all that, just to see whether they have learned anything. Okay, so this is the first one. Next one is quite popular as well, Dunning-Kruger Effect. Just now was Ebbinghaus, now is Dunning-Kruger. Maybe you have heard this before. Dunning-Kruger was more like a cognitive bias. Cognitive bias as in we tend to overestimate our ability. I think Dunning-Kruger has proven in a way, like at the beginning of anything, we tend to assume that we are good, right? And slowly as we learn more, we start to realize that we are not really that good. This is why, like those, a lot of people will say, like, the more you learn, the more you don't know, right? Which is true, because the more, like what we're doing now, the more I learn from all of you, the more I know that I don't know, right? So, but at the beginning stage, we tend to have this cognitive bias, and what happened is in learning is the same thing. So you try not to do this. Try to reduce self-reported competence. So in a lot of studies, I think if you read out all this meta-analysis done on any self-reported questionnaire, you will realize that there's a bias. Like if you ask your learners to rate themselves how good they are in certain technology, normally they will say they are good. In fact, they may not be that good. So you might want to reduce this kind of dependency on self-reported competence. So how do you overcome self-reported competence and all this, or anything that is self-reported? You do your own observation. That would be the best. Let's say you want to measure their digital literacy. You don't have to ask them to do a questionnaire. Actually, you just ask them to do something. Let's say design a poster using Canva, a tool or anything. If they can't do it, then they can't. That means they don't achieve that level of skills. Rather than ticking the box in the questionnaire, which they normally will just simply tick and say they are good, but they are not. So you might want to rethink on that because of this effect. Also multimodal. I think this is quite crucial for online learning. You don't expect one form or one format alone. Last time in your teaching, maybe you only want them to submit in the form of report, like a written report. But because of online learning, you might want to consider different style of submission. Like maybe some can do videos, some can submit in the form of posters, different media, rather than depending on one type of submission or one type of delivery. So you might want to consider that as well, because if you are using one, then everyone will be like, oh, I don't like this and all that. So they'll be quite tricky. Also reflective activities, which is quite related as well. From the reflective activities, you can see whether they are really good or not. It takes more time on our end, but I really love this. Like you ask a student to reflect, and then you read their reflection. You realize that you actually learn a lot from the process. You know what are your weaknesses in teaching. Some of them may not understand your language at all. So you need to change the way you deliver something. So these are some of the key things that you can focus on. Next, metacognition, cognition, which is also very popular. I'm sure you have heard people talk about this many times. So in learning sciences, I think this is also one of the most widely studied area. In simple term, metacognition means thinking about thinking. You are not asking students to think. You are teaching them explicitly on how to reflect, on how to think. That's the tricky thing. That's why it's called meta, because it's like a bird's eye view of the whole context. So in a normal case, you would ask them question and then they answer, right? In a normal case, let's say you ask A, they answer A. So how do you know whether they are thinking? You will just judge based on the answer, right? The answer that they have provided you, the A answer, whatever they have written. But metacognition go beyond that. Instead of measuring the answer, you are going to ask them, how did you come up with A? How did you derive with A? So they're going to think, okay, So they're going to reflect, okay, I managed to get A because, I related to this and all that. So those are the processes that they try to apply different way of telling you how they get A rather than just looking at A alone. So this is, you don't have to be too explicit. Like, you don't have to go to class, okay, today I'm going to teach you metacognition. No, you don't have to do that. But what I'm telling you today is like, you need to know that a certain way of measuring your learners can be more on the process rather than the outcome, because we focus a lot on the outcome, the end product, but we don't focus much on the process. So I think you need to change a bit by asking learners to evaluate the process, right? Or you yourself evaluate the process. So it can be like giving them a reflection task or ask them to talk about it after the session and all that. Group project would be a nice example like this one. So you provide clear learning pathway. You know that throughout this course, these are the things that they will be learning, and ask them to reflect from time to time. But you can embed it within the assessment itself. Like I put here, purposeful self-assessment. It can be self-assessment and then or learning portfolio or learning logs. I don't know whether you have done this, but you can try. So instead of putting everything in the test, like a midterm test or final exam, you also give certain portion to learning log. So they have to keep track. So you can give like 10% or maybe 20%. So they keep log of every process that they learn, and then they compile it, and then they give it to you, and then you take a look. So that will be one way, which is why you need to re-examine the reward system. You have to reward the thinking skill, not reward the outcome of they get the answers in the exam, more on the process. So you try to award marks for those kind of activities. Like if they are more reflective, you give them more marks because they reflect on the whole learning process rather than just getting the answer. Because like I said, the answer sometimes can be copied, right? So for online testing and all that, the way you design your test, you have to think about it as well. Think about it as in, don't focus only on the outcome, because if you only get the answer can be copied, right? This is where a lot of educators or a lot of teachers will say, oh, I don't know how to stop them from cheating, because it depends on the questions. If the question is more focusing on the reflective part or on this metacognition part, there's no way for them to cheat, because they have to rely on whatever they have learned or whatever experience they have, right? And the moment they cheat, it's quite obvious. I mean, if I write my own reflection and Dr. Haider is writing his own reflection, it cannot be the same, right? If it's the same, then something weird. But if it's a straightforward answer, like 1 + 1 is equal 2, both of us will get the same answer, and you don't know whether we are cheating or not, because 2 is 2, right? So it depends on the way you design the questions. Insight number 4, which is very popular, but it's called a myth now. It's a most controversial, I would say, one of the most controversial idea in learning sciences, the labeling of learning style. We always hear people say we have different style of learning. We have auditory learner, we have visual learner, kinesthetic learner. These are the labeling of VARK. Now, in learning sciences, this is widely studied and widely controversial, because we know that in actual fact, when we learn, we don't use one. We are not like one style kind of learner. We use multiple styles according to multiple situation. If you're learning football, are you going to turn on a visual space? You cannot be, right? If you're learning football, you're going to turn on your kinesthetic part, right? If you're learning art, you're going to turn on your visual. If you're learning how to speak and listen, you're going to turn on your auditory capability. So we are actually multi styles. So it's wrong to assume that I'm only a visual learner. When I'm forced to learn football, I have to learn using my kinesthetic. I will not be, okay, you teach me using visual. How on earth are you going to learn how to kick a ball just by looking at the visual, right? I mean, it's a bit misleading to label everyone according to this kind of labeling. But again, it's meaningful to know which one is dominant, but it's wrong to assume that you are only one kind of learner. We are all multi abilities, right? We have multi intelligence and all that. So because of this myth, when you design your material or content, you need to again go back to multimedia design principle. I'll share in the next slide, where you try to reduce all this cognitive load in a way. Try not to put too many things in one time at one time, and focus on multimodalities again. Focus on, like for skill A, you're going to learn using this method, like visuals, more on visuals. And then skill 2, because you need to do more hands on, then you'll be activating your kinesthetic. So everyone will learn all differently. It's not like you only learn because you are visual learners or you're going to do well in this course. No, everyone's going to activating different skill set, so then they become a more holistic kind of being. Okay, so this is the multimedia principle, and I will not go into detail, but you can check it later on Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So there has this like coherence principle, signaling principle. So when you do your video, before you jump into your content, you have like signposting, part 1, part 2. You have some clues that you want to tell. Okay, now we have learned this. Okay, next, what we're going to do. So there is a lot of signaling being done. Redundancy principle, try not to be redundant. If you are sharing something using your voice, then try not to overwhelm with so many pictures, so that they can pay attention to your voice. So if you want to rely on the visual, then you can turn off your video, then focus on the visual alone, so they can focus only on the visual. So there are certain things that you can learn from this theory. Okay, and last one, the peak end effect. It's quite popular in psychology, but it's widely used in negotiation, like the business world. They applied it a lot. But in teaching and learning, we tend to forget this. We always peak in the beginning, right? When we teach, we're so good in the beginning, so energetic, so enthusiastic in the beginning. When towards the end of our teaching, we go flat. But in in actual fact, that's where you need to peak in a way. So you go to your peak, which is the most interesting part of your teaching, and for that day, towards the end, you cannot go flat. You have to go up again. So how do you do this, right? You need to use this anchoring strategy. So from the beginning of your teaching, you need to make sure that you shape your learners to expect something towards the end. For example, a good example that I normally do is, so I want you to pay attention to what I'm teaching now, because in the end of this session, we will do a quiz. So that's like an anchoring that, okay, they are going to look forward for that quiz towards the end, rather than just finish the class, that's it, right? Because you have anchored it nicely, so they're going to pay attention to you and anticipate something towards the end. So that's called the anchoring strategy, setting the stage. You can have some negotiation if you want to. Negotiation is good when you deal with adult learners, like in universities, for example. You can negotiate. Instead of telling them what to do towards the end, you can say, now I have I allocated 30 minutes towards the end. I was thinking of doing this, but what do you think? Do you want to do something else? So you do some negotiation. When learners are being involved in the decision making of certain things, they will hold on towards the end, because those are their decision, not yours. So they say, a good example would be like you ask your friends, what are we going to do in this party, right? So if they say we want to play this, they're going to come to your party because they are the one who decided that, right? So this is some of the strategies that you can consider. But of course, for younger learners, negotiation can be quite tricky, especially for younger kids, because they probably would just come up with something extraordinary that you cannot fulfill. Start with the end in mind. Again, same concept. So you kind of know what you're going to end. So the moment you start, you try to anchor that immediately, right? And on a high note, you can do some exit tickets, meaningful recap. You can do some quizzes. You can ask them to reflect immediately before they leave, or link to some post-class activities. So if you want them to do something after the class, like do a video or do a video log or something, link it to that so that they can hold on to that end from the beginning. So because a lot of time we just start, we forgot about the end. So in between, they just go, when missing, or they because there's no ending to them. Any classes will be the same because everyone ends with a bye-bye. So in your case, you can end it differently, right? So these are some suggestion on how to improve that. Okay, I think that's all from me, but I would like to end it with this kind of quote. We may, exhibit an admirable command of content. You can be really good in your field, possess a dazzling variety of pedagogical skills, but without knowing what's going on in our students' head, that knowledge may be presented or that skill exercise in the vacuum or misunderstanding. So I think regardless of what I've told you today for the first five things, or whatever insight we get from the learning sciences, your your best bet is always on the learners. So you need to get to know them. I know it's hard, but then you try your best to try to capture their problems, the challenges they face. A bit of background knowledge will help. I mean, at least you know them by name, or a bit of background knowledge, because or else it'll be very hard to do whatever you want to do, right? Because you may think this is effective, but without realizing that your learners are doing something else behind, right? So you might want to consider this. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna end my yeah. I think that's all from me. So back to
Thank
the
you. Yeah, thank you very much. Really, Dr. Chua, it was so wonderful to see. And I was really enjoying the way you were answering, you were telling everything, the powerful contents, which was so great. And I love your slides. They were so wonderful and full of references, actually. You
yeah.
have given and mentioned the books from where you were quoting.
Suggested reading. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the different insights about the forgetting curve and these different kind of insights which are very important. And I love that part of the metacognition,
Yep.
thinking of the thinking.
Yep.
Mostly we just give this kind of question just for the students to reflect on the
Yeah.
question, because
Yep.
this is how we can differentiate. And very rightly you have mentioned that yes, of course, you have given my example and your one, that our question will not match. Yes, of
Yep.
course, because it is not 2 plus 2 4. It is actually the
Correct.
different perception. And
Yeah.
mostly we do it. And I love the part of that, the peak and the end, how you are going to achieve that, and the smooth, the sailing from the way you started it, and how you are going to connect it at the end. Because
Yes.
the audience, they always see the connection between the first thing and the last thing.
Yep.
What I usually do is the same thing in the class. That mostly I start with the some kind of diagram, and then I say I will connect it to the last one. So
Yeah.
then they remain curious all the way that how he's going to connect these different concepts, because I
Yep.
just suddenly start with the different concepts and then I linked it together, and then I show them that now you see how it works, how it is connected, and things like that. Mostly,
Yes.
uh, I love the way you started it from the meaningful. What is meaningful? That is was the wonderful thing. I love that part. That really meaningfulness is very vary from person to person, from institution
Exactly.
to institution, and that's why you have started it very nicely. That what you are trying to achieve at the end, that is meaningful according to
Yes.
you.
Yes.
And one thing was very much visible, Dr. Chua, that really you are a wonderful trainer. The way you were connecting the different dots was so amazing. And I love the part of your explanation. What a great command you have, or particularly on online, that the pedagogies and the way you were showing that it actually contains your experiences which you have experienced with the passage of time, because you were connecting the different strategies, and how did the educators and the teachers they have shown the reservation and how they can be solved. Really, that was an interesting part, because so many things you have shown to our viewers from around the globe, that yes, online teaching can be very engaging, can be very participative, can be very wonderful in terms of if you know this science of learning,
Learning.
because it is, yeah, involved in that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful and great presentation, explanation. Really love that part. And if you allow me, should we start with the first question, please?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Would be glad.
So the very first question, which is very wonderful in terms of that they want to ask that Dr. Chua, please tell us, how do you keep your students engaged in online learning? Your personal experience. Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as as I was sharing earlier, when you say engage is really, really subjective, because even in a normal classroom teaching, if you have 100 students or maybe 50 students in front of you, it's very hard to make sure that all 50 are actually with you. The only reason why we think they are with you because you are there, right? Because you're in the class, and then you think that, oh, all 50 are paying attention to you. But the minds may not be with you. They could be thinking about something else. They could be thinking about what to eat during the recess time or during the break and all that. They could be thinking about other matters. But they seem engaged because they are looking at you or they are sitting in front of you. In online setting is a bit different because you don't see them that close. Even if you see them, they could be uh, you know, uh, having a different type of personality in altogether because it's online, and you lose out on that. So what one thing that I realized, and I have been telling a lot of teachers, you have to let go of this conception of engagement meaning seeing them or having them with you all the time. Engagement in online setting to me has changed or evolved because of this pandemic, and the only way to kind of engage your learners is through activities. Meaning it's not about you talk and then they pay attention to you. That one I think is quite hard to control. The only way to know is you try to reduce on all this time that you spend talking or teaching live. Do more activities, because from those activities then you will see whether they are engaged with your with your teaching or not. And your activities has to be more inclusive, as in don't try to favor only certain groups of learners. You can have a variety. Like I told my student as well, we're going to start very basic so that everyone can join, then slowly you do some progression. If you immediately start with a very difficult task, the weaker ones will feel like you are not helping them, and they will not collaborate, and then they will just maybe just let leave, or maybe just won't work with the rest. So always design your activities in a progression manner, and the progression is not like a whole semester. It can be one hour, for example. You can start off with something very simple, and then slowly go to a more difficult one, get them to see the concept, and then move them into groups. So it's a challenge. I wouldn't say, like, even in my experience, I wouldn't say I'm really good in enhancing engagement, but by having that expectation reduced in my mind, saying that I don't want, like, to burden myself by thinking I need to engage every single learners in my class, then it is that process. You feel calmer, and then when you teach, you don't have to be that angry all the time. I've seen teachers who are angry all the time because they are trying to force the learners to be with them. I think it's quite impossible. Even in a normal classroom, it's quite impossible to actually know every single one of your learners, like keep them motivated. But at your best, do more activities. And you can also try out like gamification as well. Give them points. And there's one tool that I think maybe you can try. It's called Class Dojo. For those who have never tried this, classdojo.com, where every student can be keyed into that system, and you award marks according to their participation and engagement. So my own experience, even with university students, those are something like a motivating factor for them to claim like certain badges, or if you want to give them marks, that would be good as well. But to me, those are all extrinsic motivation that may not be sustainable. The sustainable part is always do your activities with them together, and the more helpful you are to them, in a way, I mean, the way they perceive you as helpful, they will be with you. If they start to perceive you as somebody who is not helpful, right, an educator who try to distance themselves, there are some educators who teach and then just go, that's it, right, and no sense of helpfulness or no sense of trust built. Mostly you will see the engagement will not be that high. If learners know that you are helping them to learn the certain concept, they will be with you no matter how complicated the question is. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
sorry for the long answer.
No, no, no. It was
Yeah,
completely nice. It was a wonderful answer, and
yeah.
you have very rightly related to it. And that's the beauty of the expert, that they explain things in a very simple way, in a simple words, which you have done it. A wonderful answer. Since you are the expert of the online teaching and learning, you conduct the different workshops and webinars on online as well. Now, there is a concern of the researchers and students regarding the its significance. So they have asked one question that Dr. Chua, please tell us: do certificates of online courses count for employers or for employment? Yes, please.
This it's quite tricky to answer this one because I think certification is more like a personal motivation, to treat it like how to put it, like something that your employer or would accept and all that. I think that would not really add a lot of weight, I think now, because to a lot of people these are kind of like generic skills or general skills that we should have. But if you're talking about a formal certification, like if you go through a course like a full massive open online course and all that, I think that would be quite useful in adding on to your resume or your CV and all that. I think to me it's like this: whatever you learn, whether it's certified or non-certified, you can have it as a personal goal for your own personal growth, personal upskilling or reskilling. That's one. Another one is to improve your CV or improve your resume. So you don't have to be bothered about whether people will accept it or not. You just make sure that you learn from the process. If you get a certificate for it, then it becomes a bonus, and then you can put it in your CV. If you don't get from any certification from that, treat it as a learning experience as long as you learn something, rather than trying to get a cert but then you don't learn anything. So that's not really meaningful as well, right? So but I think these days, if you're talking about teaching line or education line, if you have a bit of experience or certification in this area, you'll be, of course, you know, more of a advantage. You have that competitive edge when it comes to other candidates because you have that more experience in that area. But you need to make sure you learn. I have a lot of people who compile a lot of certificates, but actually they just compile without really knowing the skill, so that would be quite tricky as well. Okay.
Very
Yeah.
nice, very nice, sir. Again, you have connected it back to the our topic, which is actually the learning.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of certificates, as you mentioned, but if you haven't learned that skills
Yep.
and you haven't learned that content, so it is not going to bring that much
Sure.
significance to you. So very nicely and wonderful answer to that question. Now we have another question which comprise of two parts, which is based on actually your own teaching style and methodology. The first part of the question is, dear Prof, during this global pandemic, in what ways your lectures and pedagogy changed? That is the first part. And second part of the same question is, what lessons have you learned from online learning?
We lost you. I think we lost the Haider, right? The Haider, are you there? Kind of lost you. You there? We kind of lost you just now. Hello, Dr. Haider. Usual loss. But maybe while waiting for Dr. Haider to, I can answer the first part of the question, which is on the on how has it changed in my context of teaching and learning. So I would say that I think the biggest change is always the modalities. You have to realign whatever you have been doing in the normal classroom, in a face-to-face classroom, into the online mode. And when it comes to the online mode, what I noticed was uh, the thing that I learned the most would be picking up the skills, because like before this, maybe we don't really use Zoom, we don't really use all these tools. So I have to quickly pick up all these skills of learning all these tools and see what are the best one for me. Not for everyone, because whatever is comfortable to me, like I said, it will be aligned to my learners. So then I decide to do mapping. What I did was I map. So let's say normally I would do this pedagogy in the class. A good example will be problem-based learning. I use a lot of problem-based learning in my teaching, in a normal teaching, face-to-face teaching. And I have to map, like, okay, normally I would be doing this in a group, in a physical setting, but now because it's online, I have to decide whether how am I going to change this problem-based learning into the online setting. So I have to decide, okay, maybe this part, instead of using the normal group, I will have to split them into breakout rooms. So I'll do my own mapping. So I have a very clear mapping of these are the normal pedagogy that, or things that I do of in the classroom. Now I have to do online. I map it first. So I think in terms of the change is more on the mode. Then I realized what along the way, another thing changes is my my appreciation and also expectation of the learners. What I realize is in the physical setting, I don't really know most of them. So when it's online, somehow I'm closer, ironically, because even though they are all over the place, I get to know them more and better. In fact, they get to know us clearly because the interaction is more straightforward. Because in the class, let's say if I'm teaching 100 students in my class, if I'm standing in front, I cannot be talking to every single student. But with online, I think I get to know every one of them because they were there in front of me with a with a webcam and the name, and also some of them actually chat with me and all that. So I get to know them further. So I think that's another thing that have changed. And of course, the assessment part, which is still quite a challenge to me until now. I have to change my assessment. Last time, maybe I can still rely on the paper and pen, like the final exam. That I have to change it to project. And in a way, it enlightened me in a way, as in I can do this differently. Before this, maybe I'm so used to doing final exam, and then I realized, oh, actually I can do this in a different way using project. So there's always the bright side of this change. So yeah, sorry, Dr. Head, I only captured the first part of the question just now before we kind of lost you. Yeah, the second part of the
Yes.
question, I didn't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, dear doctor, we have the internet connection issue.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah, so that's why we have to wind it. We will have another part of this session because
Okay.
that would be, we have received a lot of question
Okay.
regarding this session. So we will
Okay.
arrange a special question answer
Sure.
session for half an hour so that you can address all that question.
Sure.
So sorry for the
No
technological
problem.
limitations of
No problem.
internet. What is your message to the world as a teacher, speaker, author, professional, and educator? Yes, please.
Message is, I think as an educator, we should never stop learning, and no matter how difficult or how challenging it is, we try our best to do more with less. That's my concept as well. So whatever resources you have at your disposal at the moment, try to maximize it. Try to see what else can be done. But the bottom line is always ensure your learning happen. I mean, whoever you're teaching or whatever content you're teaching, the learning must take place. And yeah, but again, I think last kind of advice is don't overburden yourself. Like you need to take care of your well-being as well. Okay.
Yeah, very nice
Yeah.
message to the world. Thank you very much, Dr. Chua, for that wonderful presentation. To the audience that do follow our distinguished guest speaker through his research work, and you can email him for future learning and guidance. He is very generous and always ready to help the people. Moreover, wonderful explanation and powerful content which the great speaker has already elaborated will help you to learn and develop your understanding regarding the online learning. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Chu Kiman. I would also like to thank our audience who join us. If you have any additional question about information shared today, please email to us or connect with the speaker directly through his email or social media. Thank you very much for your support and liking our session. Stay tuned as many sessions are on the way. Please do not miss any session. Until next session, take care of yourself. Bye bye.